In 1968, a researcher named John B. Calhoun built a paradise, not for humans, for mice. He constructed a perfect enclosure, unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, no disease, no reason to die. Everything a mouse could possibly need was provided in abundance. He called it Universe 25. And then he put 4 pairs of mice inside and watched what happened. For the first few months, everything went exactly as you'd expect. The mice ate, they reproduced, the population doubled, then doubled again. They were healthy, well-fed, and completely safe. By day 315, the population had reached 620 mice. The enclosure was thriving, and then something went wrong. Not something obvious, not disease, not starvation, not a predator breaking through the walls, something quieter, something that started in behavior before it ever showed up in the population numbers. The social structure of the colony began to collapse, and once it started, nothing stopped it. The dominant males, the ones who would normally defend territory, find mates, protect their young, stopped doing all of it. They retreated to the center of the enclosure and did nothing. They ate, they slept, they groomed themselves obsessively. They had no purpose, so they invented none. Researchers called them the beautiful ones, physically perfect, psychologically hollow. The females stopped nurturing their young. Mothers would abandon litters halfway through raising them. Some attacked their own offspring. The young mice, raised without proper social modeling, never learned how to be mice. They didn't know how to court. They didn't know how to fight for territory. They didn't know how to raise young of their own. They had been born into abundance and had never needed to develop the skills that scarcity demands. By day 560, the population had peaked at 2,200. Then it began to fall. Not because of overcrowding. The enclosure could physically hold many more mice. Not because of food shortage, the food was still unlimited. The population fell because the mice had forgotten how to be mice. Birth rates collapsed, social bonds dissolved, violence became random and purposeless. By the time Calhoun ended the experiment, the population was in terminal decline. Universe 25 never recovered. Every mouse that had been born into the paradise eventually died. None of them produced a generation that survived. Calhoun called what he observed a behavioral sink. The idea was simple and terrifying. When a species is removed from the pressures that shaped its behavior, the behavior doesn't just change, it collapses. The struggles that seemed like the enemy of well-being were actually the architecture of it. Remove the struggle, and you don't get happiness. You get dissolution. Now, Calhoun was studying mice, but he wasn't thinking about mice. He published his findings in a 1973 paper titled Death Squared: The Explosive Growth and Demise of a Mouse Population. In it, he drew an explicit parallel to human society. He was watching the 1960s unfold: rapid urbanization, population density, the early signs of social fragmentation in American cities, and he believed Universe 25 was not a warning about mice. It was a warning about us. The question is whether he was right. Let's look at what the beautiful ones actually were. They were mice who had been given everything and asked for nothing in return. No territory to defend, no mate to compete for, no young to raise, no threat to respond to. And in the absence of those demands, they retreated into pure self-maintenance, grooming, eating, sleeping. They were alive by every biological measure, but they were not functioning as social animals. They had become, in Calhoun's phrase, autistic, a term he used loosely to describe complete social withdrawal. The parallel to certain patterns in modern human society is uncomfortable enough that most people prefer not to look at it directly. Because here's what's true about human beings. We evolved under conditions of scarcity, danger, and radical interdependence. For 300,000 years, survival required other people. You needed your group to hunt, to protect, to raise children, to share knowledge, to mourn the dead, to tell stories around the fire that made the darkness less terrifying. Isolation wasn't just unpleasant, it was lethal. Your social bonds were not a luxury. They were the mechanism by which you stayed alive. And then, very quickly by evolutionary standards, that changed. Modern humans in wealthy societies have achieved something that no animal in the history of life on Earth had ever achieved before. Universe 25. The removal of most survival pressures. Food is abundant. Shelter is available. Predators don't exist. Disease is increasingly managed. The threats that shaped every behavior we have, the cooperation, the social bonding, the drive to contribute and be needed, those threats are largely gone. And we are watching something happen that looks in certain ways remarkably like what Calhoun observed. Loneliness rates in the United States have doubled since the 1980s. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health epidemic, noting that approximately half of American adults reported measurable levels of loneliness despite being, by historical standards, extraordinarily comfortable and safe. Japan has a government minister dedicated entirely to addressing loneliness. The United Kingdom appointed the world's first minister for loneliness in 2018. Birth rates across the developed world are collapsing. Japan, South Korea, Italy, Spain, Germany, countries with high standards of living, abundant food, advanced healthcare, are watching their populations decline not because people are dying young, but because people are choosing not to reproduce. South Korea's fertility rate in 2023 was 0.72, the lowest ever recorded for any country in human history. Young men in particular are withdrawing. Studies consistently show declining rates of employment, social participation, romantic relationships, and friendship among young men in wealthy countries. The phenomenon has been documented extensively enough that researchers have given it multiple names: the Great Male Retreat, deaths of despair, social recession. The beautiful ones had a different name, but the behavior rhymes. Now, here's where it's important to be careful. Calhoun's experiment has limits. Mice are not humans. We have culture, language, and the capacity for conscious adaptation. We can look at what's happening and choose to respond differently. We have done this before. We are not trapped in a behavioral sink the way a mouse in an enclosure is. And the causes of modern social fragmentation are genuinely complex. Economics, technology, political polarization, the design of cities, the structure of work, the collapse of community institutions, all of these play roles that can't be reduced to a simple, we removed hardship, and now we're collapsing. But here's what Calhoun got right. Regardless of the limits of his model, humans, like every other social species, were shaped by demands. The demands of survival, of cooperation, of contribution, of being needed. Those demands weren't just external pressures that we endured on the way to the good life. They were the structure around which human psychology was built. They were what gave behavior its direction, its meaning, its social texture. When you remove the demand to contribute, some people invent new demands. They set goals, build communities, create meaning from scratch. But many don't. Many do what the beautiful ones did. They retreat into pure self-maintenance, consumption without contribution, comfort without connection, alive by every measure, functioning by no meaningful one. The behavioral sink isn't a prediction. It isn't inevitable, but it is a pattern that has appeared in every social species studied under conditions of abundance without demand. And it is a pattern worth taking seriously, because the mice in Universe 25 never found their way back. Calhoun died in 1995. He spent the last decades of his life trying to articulate what he believed the experiment really meant. He didn't think the collapse was inevitable. He thought it was a warning. He believed that humans, unlike mice, had the capacity to design our way out, to consciously build environments that preserved the social demands that shaped us, even when scarcity no longer imposed them naturally. What he was really saying was this: struggle is not the opposite of the good life. For a social species shaped by 3 million years of radical interdependence, struggle, the right kind of struggle, chosen struggle, struggle in service of something beyond yourself, is the condition under which the good life becomes possible at all. The mice in Universe 25 had everything they needed, and they disappeared anyway. The enclosure still exists in photographs: unlimited food, unlimited water, no predators, no disease, empty.